everything we can. We've thrown everything at this, and now it's time to bunker down.
Sydney in lockdown until the end of September. New mask rules for everyone and a curfew for hotspot suburbs. Small businesses devastated, hundreds ordered to close, and tonight Bunnings is shutting its doors right across Sydney. Safe at last, mothers, fathers and children, the first to arrive in Australia from Afghanistan. And can Penrith stop the runaway Rabbitohs? Two heavyweights clash in Friday night football.
This is 9 News with Georgie Garden.
Good evening. Greater Sydney is being locked down until the end of September, and harsh new measures will come into force as another 644 people test positive to COVID. Among the new rules, a nighttime curfew for hotspot LGAs from Monday, and unless exercising, everyone across the state must be wearing a mask when they set foot outside their door.
Stricter, longer, more onerous. Life under lockdown, a premier under pressure, and still no guarantee that numbers will fall.
We're doing everything we can. We've thrown everything at this, and now it's time to bunker down.
For all of New South Wales, masks are now required outdoors except when exercising. For all of Sydney, lockdown extended for a month. For all hotspot areas, a curfew preventing movement between 9 p.m. and 5 a.m. begins Monday.
Do I wish that I raised curfews day one? Yeah, probably, but you probably would have laughed me out.
I think it needs it. I don't like it, but I think it needs it.
We have to do what we have to do, man.
I just think it should be done all over, to be honest, and not just the affected ones.
After weeks of long lines at testing and vaccination hubs in our west, tonight the city, like this street in Eastwood, is divided, with workplaces in hotspots facing harsher restrictions and exercise limited to an hour.
Western Sydney didn't cause this mess. This was caused because the state government locked Sydney down too late. If they'd locked Sydney down when the virus was in Bondi, people here in Western Sydney wouldn't be suffering right now.
Whilst the evidence of curfews is mixed, the evidence to a lot of this thing is mixed, but I don't want us to ever look back and say we didn't try, we didn't put everything into this.
It's been 65 days since the outbreak began. 8 days later, the first stay-at-home orders announced, the Premier refusing to label a lockdown.
But at the same time, we are at this stage comfortable that the settings that are in place are the appropriate settings.
Since then, one limousine driver is now 10,500 cases. One cluster, now a crisis.
I understand that this is going to be so hard for everyone across New South Wales for the next 4 to 6 weeks.
I wish there was a perfect pathway. I wish there was a list of things that said, do this and you'll be okay.
But you did have a list of things that you could have done earlier that you didn't do.
Not at all, not at all.
Yes, this is the list of things this is the list of things we could have done earlier.
This is the list we received last night.
The Premier at all points has followed, asked us to provide the best advice.
Holy how many cars are here?
This afternoon, police blocked the M1 at Morisset, checking all vehicles heading towards Sydney. Tonight, there'll be more patrols as police gain even more powers, able to lock down buildings without a positive case and demand to see everyone inside.
What I said to the officers is the day of giving cautions is over.
I do not want to be standing here every day announcing these high rates of hospitalisation and these deaths. Every one of these deaths is someone's mother, father, grandmother, grandfather.
The Premier continues to tie vaccination to freedom as we race towards 6 million jabs. Today we reach 5.6. That is 30% of the population now fully vaccinated.
You cannot eliminate the virus. We have to live with it. So people have to be straight with the public and tell them there are going to be more cases. There are going to be deaths. But we can't live in lockdown forever.
For Sydney, though, our long lockdown winter will now seep into spring. Charles Croucher, 9 News.
Permits, mandatory vaccines and rapid testing on site. Those are the new requirements for many workers to keep their jobs. Ongoing transmission at hospitals, childcare and other workplaces has prompted a major shift on containment measures.
Shutting up shop under a new crackdown on workplaces, one Bravo's struggling nursery at Marsden Park now closed indefinitely.
It's very devastating because I already had to take $40,000 out of the bank. I had to borrow $40,000 to survive.
All garden centres, pet shops, hardware stores and office supply chains in the 12 hotspot councils to be shuttered from Monday.
It's not something that you can say, oh, click and collect. You want to see physically the way the plan is.
Even though she won't have contact with customers, staffer Rebecca Schultz will have to abide by strict new rules. The sole job now, keeping hundreds of thousands of dollars of stock alive.
Feeling like crap. I'm being threatened with a needle, and I believe it is a threat because this is something that we are told we have a choice to, yet now I can't come to my own workplace.
Anyone who leaves the local government areas of concern for authorised work must have at least one dose of vaccine by the end of the month or face daily rapid antigen testing on site. Childcare and disability support workers don't have a choice. No jab, no job. A decision made after exposure at 30 daycare centres in just 3 days this week. A similar rule already applies for tradies on construction sites and it's causing concern.
People should have the choice of what they're putting into their bodies. If they're frontline workers, that's a different story. However, I don't support mandatory vaccinations.
Statewide, vaccines will be mandatory for all health workers. Transmission has been an ongoing problem at Sydney hospitals. Of the 4 people who died today, 3 got the virus in healthcare settings. Food distribution centres and supermarkets, another major concern. 3 cases are linked to this Woolworths in Granville. Authorised workers leaving Fairfield, Cumberland and Canterbury Bankstown will no longer be required to have surveillance testing every 3 days. The burden it was placing on labs was simply too great.
Positive tests are taking too long to get processed and that adds delay.
In addition, from next Saturday, any worker who goes in or out of the hotspots must now carry with them a permit available from Service New South Wales. That includes truckies, tradies, bus and train drivers, health workers and retailers.
We are here because of the state government's mismanagement of the whole issue. And I'm not going to cop it anymore, and my residents are paying the brunt.
Liz Daniels, 9 News.
We're going to go now to our reporter James Wilson at Marsden Park. And James, a big announcement from Bunnings today.
Yeah, that's right, Georgie. The hardware giant has announced it will be closing its Greater Sydney stores from Monday. Now, only authorised tradespersons will now be able to access the Bunnings stores. As for the general public, well, it's click and collect only. Bunnings Managing Director this afternoon released a statement saying that he wanted to ensure the safety of both his team members and the general public, which means that people must only do click and collect at these 44 locations across Sydney, and that a uniformed approach was the best method for them. Now, of course, this is also hoping to stop travel between LGAs and also stop people from doing the wrong thing by shopping outside of those areas which are of concern tonight. Georgie.
James Wilson, thank you. The Premier has called these restrictions the final measures. So let's take a look at what they are in detail. Here's Nine's Lizzie Pearl.
First, the big one. From Monday, a curfew will come into force across the LGAs of concern. This means between the hours of 9 p.m. and 5 a.m, you can only leave your home if you're an authorised worker, for emergencies and for medical care. Across the entire state, wearing a mask will be mandatory everywhere outside your home except when exercising. And if you're in one of those LGAs of concern, that exercise will be limited to just 1 hour per day. More shops in those LGAs will be forced to close their doors as well. It will be click and collect only for garden centres, office supplies, hardware, building supplies and pet supplies. Tradies will still be allowed to shop in store though. All exams, education and professional development activities must be online, with the exception of the HSC. Police will also have tough new powers to lock down apartment blocks and declare homes COVID risks. Officers will also be able to force people to return home if they're issued an infringement notice. And if a person is caught in an LGA of concern without a valid reason, they'll be sent home and into 14 days self-isolation.
Thank you, Lizzie. Nine's Charles Croucher joins us now. And Charles, this outbreak is now really testing our contact tracers, isn't it?
It is, Georgie. With more transmission comes more work for those contact tracers, and they've been some of the heroes of this pandemic. Tonight, though, they are under more pressure than ever before. Today, we've heard from doctors, from cases and from some of the tracers themselves who say the workload has caused them to fall behind. Venues and GPs are contacting potential cases instead of health officials, and it all impacts morale. This is a long outbreak in the midst of a long pandemic, and Georgie, the strain on all frontline services tonight is high.
Understandable. Thank you, Charles. The Defence Force has joined the police operation in the state's central west, helping to deliver care packages and monitoring compliance in Dubbo. From tomorrow, permits will be needed to travel from Sydney to the state's regions, but they're not yet available on Service New South Wales.
Permit system will come up by at least midnight tonight. And as I said earlier, with any of the permits, if they're not available, and if you have a lawful purpose, you can still travel. We won't take action against you for the permits, but people need to remember it's an offence today to leave Greater Sydney to go to regional New South Wales unless you have a reasonable excuse.
And reasons to leave include essential work and moving house. Well, police have warned anyone thinking of attending tomorrow's illegal protest in Sydney will be met with the full force of the law. Kelly Fedor joins us from Victoria Park. And Kelly, more than 1,000 officers will be on patrol.
Yes, Georgie, 1,400 police positioned in this park and also right across the city. Among their jobs is patrolling roads heading in. They will also be patrolling public transport. We anticipate that taxis and rideshare drivers will additionally be banned from the area. That's amid continued calls online for people to gather here to rally against restrictions. Anthony Kaloof, who is an anti-lockdown activist who travelled here from Queensland and was involved in the planning of this weekend's protest, was today jailed for a maximum of 8 months. Although I'm told he will appeal, that is a very strong statement by a magistrate about the court's approach to these anti-lockdown protests. Georgie?
Kelly Fedor, thank you. There's been a change of heart over the ban on elective and non-urgent surgery at private hospitals across Greater Sydney. Announced yesterday, the ban has been partly reversed today, allowing surgeries such as cancer procedures and colonoscopies. The original decision was to enable staff to support the public system in fighting COVID. The backflip, a relief for some, despite the confusion. 7 inmates at Silverwater Jail have now tested positive for COVID-19. Corrective services say the inmates all just arrived and caught the virus in the community. There's also a positive case at Cobham Youth Justice Centre in Warrington. The infected staff member is now in isolation. The Prime Minister has warned state and territory leaders not to backtrack on their plan for the reopening of Australia. National Cabinet had agreed to ease restrictions once 70% and 80% vaccination targets are met. But some premiers are nervous about case numbers.
The empty streets of a locked-down city and a Prime Minister who promises scenes like these will soon be a thing of the past.
We've said to Australians, you do your part, we'll do ours.
But some state leaders appear to be deviating from the national plan for reopening. Today, Scott Morrison reminded them of their word.
The national plan is a deal with Australians.
National Cabinet agreed once 70% of the eligible population is vaccinated, lockdowns will become less likely and restrictions will ease for vaccinated residents. At 80%, there would only be highly targeted lockdowns and those fully vaccinated would be exempt from all restrictions.
Some things can be eased at 70, but 80% is the real game-changer number.
But Western Australia and Queensland have now indicated it'll also depend on COVID case numbers.
And anyone who wants to argue that we should have COVID
I think they've got rocks in their head.
We support the decision of National Cabinet, which says that if 70% of the community are vaccinated and there's very low rates of transmission, then lockdowns will be much, much less likely.
The federal government says its financial support will be less likely if lockdowns go on.
The government's emergency economic support does not continue indefinitely. It's there until we get the vaccination rate to the levels that they agreed with the Prime Minister at National Cabinet.
Are you really willing to punish the people in states where the premiers choose to go into those lockdowns?
I expect the states and territories to live up to the plan they've agreed to.